Well, look, I think there's a dire need for this now. We are putting this center stage. This is a plan to end financial abuse and to deliver value for money and transparency and standards. It's clear that after a decade of Mr. Picardo in office, there is a real need to ensure that there are financial controls put in place so that there is better performance of government contracts, so that there's an end to the special interests, so that we cut waste and end financial abuses, and so that we deliver better value for money for people. And that is at the core and center stage of what we're trying to do today.
But you say in your press release that you want to put an end to abuse and corruption. Do you have any evidence for this?
It's clear that there are conflicts of interest in the adjudication of certain contracts. It's very obvious in many respects. And so there is an importance to put these controls in place. Look, the government is now conducting, in the usual way, a massive spin, as it usually does, window dressing. So when the Chief Minister is now talking about setting up an anti-corruption authority, this is a government that has flip-flopped on an anti-corruption authority. That commitment was in their 2011 manifesto. It was then withdrawn and put back in. They said that they were going to do it within 6 months in 2019. It hasn't happened. They are now magically going to deliver on it. The ministerial code of conduct was supposed to have been implemented in 2016. 6 years on, we're still nowhere closer. The reality is that we all know that there's a real need for financial controls, for transparency. We don't know how people's money, taxpayers' money, is being used. We don't know how the borrowing is being used. There is a real need for transparency, and everyone knows that.
Tell us about this investigation into awards and contracts that you want to carry out.
Well, I mean, Roy Clinton will discuss it in greater detail, but it's one of the measures, one of the 10 points that we put as part of our Back on Track plan is to have an investigation of the flow of monies through government companies, a historic one that will then be made public so that we know and we have answers as to how precisely money has been spent. We also have an anti-abuse law as part of the measures that we want to put in place, a law that will regulate whether contracts can be awarded to people, that will ensure that people who are close to the government of the day, that are members of the executive of the government of the day, cannot receive a benefit for contracts or developments that the government are announcing as part of its program. I think those are important controls. It's high time that we should have clear laws and regulations on these issues, and Gibraltar is crying out for these controls.
Okay, Mr. Clinton, you're calling for a register of interests. Isn't there already one in Parliament?
There is a register of members' interests, but I think what we're talking about here is for people to be able to see who's tendering for contracts. This goes beyond the parliamentary register for members' interests. And in fact, what the entire programme is aimed at doing is restoring trust and the basic foundations of public finance, which are transparency, value for money, and standards. And I think what we need to do is go back to basics and actually get these right. Because at the moment, for example, in government companies, there are many of them that we don't know what they're doing. So I'll give you an example. The 300 million mortgage was raised through a government company. It was spent through a government company. Not a single penny of that went through Parliament. So I don't know, for example, actually how much the schools cost because it was done through a government company. Now that cannot be right. You cannot have a situation where a government can raise 300 million on a mortgage and then spend 300 million without any scrutiny by Parliament. And I think the public have a right to know how their money is being spent. It's as simple as that.
Why do you feel the principal auditor needs greater powers?
Well, at the moment, the principal auditor, and he has been calling for a number of years, to be given greater independence of government, and I think that is right. And I also believe that there are areas which a principal auditor doesn't look at the moment, such as the corporate vehicles which are owned by government. And I think the principal auditor should be given a remit to include those within his scrutiny, so that there is no area in which public money can be spent without it being scrutinised by the principal auditor.
You want to change the standards of the way that we are transparent about money. Tell us what you would do in these areas, the highlights, if you will.
Well, the highlights. I mean, the first thing on transparency, and Keith has spoken about the government companies. We would basically undertake a review of what the activities of these companies have been. We would then look at those companies. We make sure all their accounts are filed up to date, fully filed, full disclosure, and those are those companies that really have no economic function that we can see. We would get rid of. There's no need for so many companies, and we would also make sure that anything in terms of government contracts were awarded, the actual awarding process was transparent. So basically the public should have confidence that the government is always acting in their interests and that they can see for themselves. They don't have to wait for questions in Parliament. They can see for themselves exactly what government is doing with that money. And that's what I'm focusing on.